Good morning, Year 6. Today in reading we're going to continue with the Explorer, but we're going to start answering our inference questions, which means we are going to gather information from the text to try and help us infer about different meanings. So before you finish the video, please make sure you mark the work. So, for example, if I've asked you to pause the video, please pause the video, continue with the activity, the section I've asked you to, play the video from where you've stopped, continue with the activity, and then mark your work. A lot of you are uploading your work onto Seesaw, which is great, but the answers are in the video, so please make sure you mark your work before uploading onto Seesaw. Again, use a different colour pen if you have one available, or a pencil or a highlighter if you wish to help you mark your work. This way you know how to learn from your mistakes rapidly. So let's go. Today's vocabulary lesson is going to work a little bit different. So I'm going to say the word. I'd like you to pause the video and give me the definition. So let's see if you remember all the words. Our first word is sodden. Pause the video and have a go at the definition. Well done if you said sodden is when something is soaking wet. For example, a material is soaked through with water. So you could say her clothes were sodden from jumping in muddy puddles, suggesting that her clothes were soaking wet after she had jumped in muddy puddles. Our next word is accustomed. Well done if you said that means becoming used to. So for example, you could say someone has become accustomed to the rules if they've moved to a different country, for example. So they've become used to the rules as they've moved to a different country. Your next word is scrambled. Well done if you said that's someone making their way up a steep gradient quite quickly or quite fast with their hands or their feet. So you could say they scrambled up the hillside to watch the beautiful view. Scrambled. Your next word is unbearable. Remember to pause the video and have a go at the definition before Miss Ahad gives them. Unbearable, well done. Well done if you said unbearable means you cannot tolerate or endure something. So for example, the heat may be unbearable, or going to the dentist, the pain from going to the dentist is unbearable. You cannot take or tolerate that pain. Clustered. Well done if you said clustered is when something is gathered or bunched together. So for example, in this picture, the people are gathered together following the direction of the arrow. We then have entwined. Oh, I think I've heard you say that. Entwined means something that is twisted or interweaved together. So for example, here you could say the tree branches are entwined, making the picture look picturesque. Convulse. Oh, yes, well done if you said that convulse means when you shake violently, something that's shaking quite violently. So for example, here you could say he convulsed as the winds blew through the sky, which means he's shaking quite violently as it was quite windy. We then have barely. Do you have barely any Sunday roast left after your Sunday roast, or maybe your Christmas dinner? You could say there was barely any food left in the fridge after my parents cooked all the food for Christmas. Barely. So that means something that's hardly or scarcely there. And then we have bitter. And this is a feeling of showing anger or frustration towards somebody, or resentment actually. So that means, so for example, I was bitter towards my friends as they kept playing pranks on me. Bitter. Well done if you got all the definitions correct. If you haven't, that's absolutely fine. Please go back to the PowerPoint and learn those definitions. We're going to use them in context now within our reading. So please pause the video now and get hold of your reading.
It was a girl's voice. Remember, here is just where they've heard a sudden voice. Fred felt quite scared, so now we know that the voice belongs to a girl. Fred looked out from behind the tree. The light of the moon filtered deep green to the forest floor, casting long-fingered shadows against the trees, and he could see only two bushes, both of them rustling, suggesting both of them were moving. "Who is it? Who's there?" The voice came from the second bush. Fred squinted through the dark, which means he was looking with his eyes partly closed, feeling the remaining hair rise up on his arms. "Please don't hurt us," said the bush. The accent wasn't British. It was something softer, and the voice was definitely a child's, not an adult's. "Was it you throwing poo?" Fred looked down at the ground. He snatched up a piece of years-old fossilized animal dung, suggesting that it's old poo that he's picked up. "Oh," he said, "yes." He was becoming accustomed to the dark, and he could see the shine of eyes peering out from the grey-green gloom of the undergrowth. "Are you from the plane? Are you hurt?" "Yes, we are hurt. We fell out of the sky," said one bush, as the other said, "No, not badly." "You can come out," said Fred. "It's only me here." The second bush parted. Fred's heart gave a great leap. Both the girl and her brother were covered in scratches and burns and ash, which had mixed with sweat and rain and made a kind of paste on their faces. But they were alive. He was not alone. "You survived," he said. "Obviously we did," said the first bush, "or we'd be less talkative, wouldn't we?" The blonde girl stepped out into the lashing rain, suggesting that it's pouring with rain. She stared from Fred to the other two, unsmiling. "I'm Con," she said. "It's short for Constantia, but if you call me that, I'll kill you." Fred glanced at the other girl. She smiled nervously and shrugged. "Right," he said. "If you say so. I'm Fred." "I'm Lila," said the second girl. She held her brother on her hip. "And this is Max." "Hi." Fred tried to smile, but it made the cut on his cheek stretch and burn, so he stopped and made do with a grin that involved only the left half of his face. Max was at the breathless stage of crying, which probably suggests that he's at the end stage of crying, but he's been crying quite a lot. And he clung to his sister so tightly his fingers were pressing bruises on her skin. She was leaning over to one side to hold him up, shaking with the effort. They looked, Fred thought, like a two-headed creature, arms entwined. Entwine is one of our key vocabulary words for this week, and it means to be twisted or wind together, interweaved almost. "Is your brother badly hurt?" he asked. Lila patted her brother desperately on the back. "He won't talk. He's just crying." Con looked back towards the fire and shivered. The flames cast a light on her face. She was no longer blonde. Her hair was grey with soot and brown with blood, and she had a scratch on her shoulder that looked deep. "Are you all right?" he asked, wiping rain out of his eyes. "That cut looks bad." "No, I'm not all right," Con spat. "We are lost in the Amazon jungle, and statistically speaking, it's very likely that we are going to die." To me, it's suggesting that Con's being quite negative here. "I know." Fred didn't feel he needed reminding. "I meant..." "So no." Con's voice grew thin and high. "I think it would be safe to say that none of us are all right. Not at all. Not even slightly." The bushes rustled, suggesting that the bushes were moving, maybe because of the wind. The rain hammered down on Fred's face, again suggesting that it's pouring down with rain. "We need to find shelter," he said. "A big tree or a cave or something that would..." "No." Max gave a sudden scream, a yell that was wet with spit and fear. Fred stepped backwards, raising his hands. "Don't cry, I just thought..." Then his eyes followed Max's pointing finger. There, 3 inches from Fred's shoe, was a snake. It was speckled brown and black, patchwork to match the jungle floor, and its head was as big as a fist. Who can remember what Miss A had said about the setting description in yesterday's reading lesson? So yes, it's describing that the snake is camouflaged in with the jungle floor, suggesting that it's quite similar in colours. For 1 second, nobody breathed. The jungle waited, then Max let out a second scream that dug deep into the night, and the 4 of them turned and fled, which means they turned and ran off. The ground was sodden, again suggesting that it's soaking wet, and they ran pell-mell, again crazily, they ran frantically, sending up mud into one another's eyes and grazing their elbows against trees. Fred ran as if his body were not his own, faster than he'd ever run, his palms stretched ahead of him. He tripped over a root and turned a full somersault, coming up spitting earth. He ran on. The rain blinded him and shadows flashed past him in the darkness. There was a yell behind him. "Please, Max," said Lila. Fred turned back, skidding in the mud. "He won't run." Lila bent over her brother. "And I can't carry him." The little boy lay on his back, weeping at the sky, his whole body shaking in the driving rain, again suggesting that he's quite scared and it's pouring with rain. "Come on!" Fred heaved Max over his shoulder. The boy was far heavier than he'd expected, and he screamed as Fred lifted him up. But Fred grabbed both of Max's knees and started running, his whole body screaming with pain. He could hear Lila, her feet thumping close behind them. The stitch in Fred's side was almost unbearable when he tore out of the trees and into a sudden clearing. He halted, which means it was a sudden stop, and Max bumped his head against Fred's spine and yelled. Angrily, he began trying to bite one of Fred's shoulder blades. "Please don't," said Fred, but he was barely paying attention to the boy on his back. He stared stunned ahead of him. They were standing at the edge of a wide circle of trees, open to the sky and lit by a fat moon. There was a carpet of green moss and grass, and the stars above them were clustered, again suggests that they were gathered round, or bunched together so thickly that the silver outnumbered the night, again suggesting that it was quite a dark sky, but the stars actually brightened it up. Fred lowered Max to the ground and stood bent over, his hands on his thighs, panting, suggesting he was quite out of breath. "Did the snake chase us?" said Max. "No," gasped Con. "How do you know that?" wailed Max. Lila dropped to her knees, clutching at her side. "Snakes don't, Maxie. We both know that. I just panicked," said Con. Her voice was bitter. "That's what happened. See? Look, no snakes. We were stupid. Now we are even more lost." The ground in the clearing sloped slightly towards a large puddle of water. Fred crossed over to it, his muscles aching, and sniffed. It smelt of rotting things, but he was feverishly thirsty. Feverishly in this context suggesting that he may be coming up with symptoms of a fever. He took a tiny sip and immediately spat it out. "No good," he said. "It tastes like a dead person's feet." "But I'm thirsty," said Max. Fred looked around in the clearing, hoping to find water before Max started crying again. "If you wring out your hair," he said, "there'll be water in it," which means almost like bring your hair to a side and squeeze your hair so the water falls out of it. He tugged his dark fringe down over his forehead and twisted it. A few drops fell on his tongue. "It's better than nothing." Max chewed on his hair for a second, then scrunched his eyes closed. "I'm scared," he said. It was said without whining, a simple matter of fact. Somehow it was worse than the tears, Fred thought. "I know," Lila said softly. "We all are, Maxie." She crossed to her brother and pulled him close to her. His small bony fingers closed over a burn on her wrist, but she didn't brush him away. She began to whisper in his ears in Portuguese, something soft, almost a song, a lullaby. A lullaby is like a children's song. They were both shaking slightly. Fred swallowed. "All this will look less bad in the morning," he said. "Will it?" said Con. There was a bite to the question. "Will it really?" "It can't look much worse," he said. "Once it's light, we'll be able to work out a way to get home." Con looked hard at him. There was challenge in the look, and Fred stared, unblinking, back at her. Her face was geometry. Sharp chin, sharp cheekbones, sharp eyes. "What now, then?" she said. "Our mama and papa say," began Lila. The mention of her parents made her face crease and crumple, but she swallowed and went on, almost suggesting that thinking about her parents made her quite angry. "They always say you need to sleep before you think. They say when you're exhausted you do stupid things, and they are scientists, so we should sleep." Fred found his whole body was aching. "Good, fine, let's sleep." He lay down on his side in the wet grass. His clothes were soaked through, but the air was warm. He closed his eyes. Perhaps he'll wake up in his bed at school, he thought, next to the snoring of his roommates. I'm just going to leave it there.
Before you start today's lesson, you will need a pen or a pencil and a ruler. If you haven't got your equipment, please make sure you pause the video and go and get your equipment. If you're writing out the words, you can just write the single words. If you've printed it out, please underline or circle your words. So let's begin. We're looking at word meanings today. That means looking at words in context. So in context, which means within our reading. So our first statement here is, you can see the shine of eyes peering out from behind the grey-green gloom of the undergrowth. Choose the best words to match the description above. Circle both your answers. So what Miss Ahad's going to do firstly is read all the different answers we have available. So we have, he saw somebody, the undergrowth was, close their eyes, heavy, look at him, thick. Cover their eyes, non-existent. I'm going to read the sentence out again. It says, he could see the shine of eyes peering out from behind the grey-green gloom of the undergrowth. So, starting with the sentence, it suggests he could see, so he saw somebody. And that states maybe that's a Fred, he saw someone. So I'm going to underline he saw somebody, because that is one of the words that fit in with the description above. Again, you can pick more than one word because it's suggesting words is plural, therefore suggesting it's more than one. Choose the best words to match the description above. And you can pick another word. So I've got he could see, I've ticked that one off. That suggests a similar in meaning to he saw somebody. See the shine of the eyes peering out from behind the grey-green gloom of the undergrowth. Choose the best words to match the description above. So I'm going to go with the undergrowth was, because it's suggesting that the undergrowth was grey and grey-green and it was quite gloomy. So I'm going to also underline this one here. I'd like you now to pause the video and have a go.
So we're going to go on and mark our work. Please only continue with the video once you have finished the word meanings. Remember, you're showing yourself that integrity, that you can mark your work honestly. So the ground was sodden and they ran pell-mell, sending up mud into one another's eyes and grazing their elbows against trees. What does the word in bold mean in this sentence? Well, our word in bold is grazing. So I need to look for a word that is similar in definition, so it's almost a synonym for grazing. Well, I've underlined scratching because to graze, it almost means you have a scratch on your skin. So in this sentence, it suggests that because they were running through the forest quite crazily, they scratched their elbows against the trees as they were running so fast. So that's what I've underlined. The next sentence, there was a carpet of green moss and grass, and the stars above them were clustered so thickly that the silver outnumbered the night. What does the phrase suggest about the appearance of the sky? Miss Ahad has written that there is a lot of stars that were in the sky and they shone quite bright. And I know that because it says the silver outnumbered the night, meaning that the colour of the stars were quite strong and it outnumbered the dark sky. The next we have, they ran pell-mell, sending up mud into one another's eyes. What does the description about how they were behaving suggest? So I've underlined crazily because pell-mell, it means to be quite frantic and crazy whilst you're running. So this suggests that they were behaving quite crazily as they were running away from the snake. Now pause the video and have a go at your questions. Once you have finished your questions, please come back to the video so we can mark through them together. We are now going to go through the answers together for our questions. Please make sure you've answered all questions before you continue with this video. So let's start. Question 1. What do the children from behind the bushes have in common with Fred? So from the text, there's a few different things. Firstly, they're all children. However, the most common that they all have with Fred is that they all have scratches and burns from the aeroplane crashing, so quite from the fire from the aeroplane crashing. So that would be for number 1. They all have scratches and burns. Question number 2 asks you to look at page 10, and it asks you to think about how do the attitudes of the two girls who came out from behind the bushes differ towards Fred. So firstly, you need to turn to page 10 and have a look at the different ways the girls have introduced themselves. So obviously we did say the first bush, or we'd be less talkative, wouldn't we? The blonde girl stepped out into the lashing rain. She stared from Fred to the other two, unsmiling. "I'm Con," she said. "It's short for Constantia, but if you call me that, I'll kill you." Fred glanced at the other girl. She smiled nervously and shrugged. "Right," he said. "If you say so. I'm Fred." "I'm Lila," said the second girl. She held her brother on her hip. "And this is Max." From the language here used about the attitudes about the girls, it shows that they're quite friendly in how they have introduced themselves because they want to know Fred. Con was also smiling at Fred, and so did Lila, even though she smiled quite nervously, she did smile. However, Fred, he tried to smile, which means, he wasn't smiling, he was trying, but it made the cuts on his cheek stretch and burn, so he stopped and made do with a grin. So it suggests that the girls were quite friendly towards Fred, greeting him with a smile, and that's how it differs from how Fred was towards them. Our next question, number 3, why did Con think they shouldn't have run away from the snake? So, remember when they ran away from the snake, Con said to them that they were quite stupid, and actually that they've now, because they've run away, they've actually are farther away and now are even more lost. So that's the reason why. So now they're even more lost than they were before, which is why they shouldn't have run away from the snake. You're now going to look at pages 14 to 15 in order to find answers for the next few questions. Number 4, why did Fred spit out the water he drank after being so thirsty? The reason why Fred, and it's on page 15, the reason why Fred decided to spit out the water is because he said it tasted like a dead person's feet. Remember, it smelled quite rotten, the water, and that is why he spat it out, because it tasted apparently like a dead person's feet. Number 5, why did Lila whisper into Max's ear? Remember, on page 16, on page 15, Lila whispers into Max's ear, whispering a lullaby, and that is because she wanted to comfort him because he was still feeling quite scared. So that's the reason why she whispered into Max's ear, in order to comfort him. Number 6, the mention of her parents made her face crease and crumple, but she swallowed and went on. What does the phrase suggest about how Lila is feeling? So from the language here, she made her face crease and crumple. That's almost if you're quite frowning as well, you crumple up your face, suggesting that she has quite a bitter feeling or quite angry towards them, as they have just mentioned her parents. And next, going on to the extension, this is not a choice. Everyone must do the extension. And this is asking you to look on page 14. How are the characters made to feel like they seem panicked? You need to give 2 ways using evidence from the text. Well, I'm going to discuss through the questions with this question with you, but I'd like you to submit onto Seesaw, as there can be different responses, so your teachers can check that. So the characters are made to feel panic because, remember, this is where they've just kind of got away from the snake, and they're questioning each other about, has the snake got away? Have they actually been able to flee the scene where the snake is? And that is how they feel panic. You need to give a point. So firstly, they feel panic because Connor's constantly asking questions, for example, and giving your evidence. 2 different points and 2 different pieces of evidence. So I'm going to have a look at all of your responses on Seesaw. Make sure you mark your work. I have given you all the answers. Please listen carefully to the videos to double check the answers. If you're still unsure, please send in a question on Seesaw to your teachers and we can help you. Enjoy reading. Bye for now.